بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى وأوحى ربك إلى النحل أن اتخذي من الجبال بيوتا ومن الشجر ومما يعرشون ثم كلي من كل الثمرات فاسلكي سبل ربك ذللا يخرج من بطونها شراب مختلف ألوانه فيه شفاء للناس إن في ذلك لآية لقوم يتفكرون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nahl, where we have a whole surah entitled after the bee, mentioned where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the bee and said, وَأَوْحَى رَبُّكَ إِلَى النَّحْلِ, and your Lord Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam inspired and communicated to the bee and said, take for your homes, your dwelling places, amongst the mountains, the trees, and what mankind would erect. Then go eat from every single fruit and follow the pathways of your Lord made easy for you. And what comes out of their bellies is a sharab, is a drink, مُخْتَلِفٌ أَلْوَانُهُ, which has varying colors. فِيهِ شِفَاءٌ لِلنَّاسِ, in this drink there is a cure for mankind. Surely in this there is a sign for a group of people that continuously reflect. So tonight, bi'idhnillah, upon the instruction of Allah Azza wa Jalla subhanahu, we're hoping to be amongst this group that reflects about this ayah, the creation of the bee. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah speaks to the females of the bees. As He says, فَاسْلُكِي, it's in the feminine form in the Arabic language. Kuli, eat, it's in the feminine form in the Arabic language. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking only to the females, telling the females amongst the bees to go get food. And it has been established that the bees, as it was not known before, actually have genders. There are actually male bees and female bees. And the female bees, the guys may like this, the female bees are the ones who are responsible to collect food. They're the ones responsible to clean the hive. They're the ones responsible to maintain the hive. They're the ones who guard the hive. They're the ones who feed the babies. They're the ones who maintain the hive. They do all the work. And that's why the leader is a queen bee. And the guys, the males, they do none of that. All they do is impregnate, all they do is fertilize the eggs of the queen bee. So Allah subhanahu here is not talking to all of the bees. He's talking just to the female bees. Why are you guys smiling all of a sudden? You're not bees, relax. Just to the females, because it's been known that this is their job, this is what they do. Allah subhanahu said, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ. Allah subhanahu said, there isn't a creature that crawls or walks on the earth, or one that flies with its wings, except they are in communities and nations like yourselves. Allahu Akbar. Allah subhanahu is telling us that the insect world, the animal kingdom, they're divided up into communities and nations just like us. And for Allah subhanahu to call them umam, to call them nations and communities, It means that in order for them to maintain that community, there has to be communication amongst them. In order for them to maintain a nation, there has to be emotions amongst them. Science today is struggling. Do animals have feelings? Do they have emotions? Do they have feelings with one another? They're still discovering that there are certain species that actually communicate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed us about this many years ago. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has divided rahmah, divided mercy into 100 parts. He's kept 99 parts with himself, and he sent down one part of rahmah. Allahu Akbar. If you were to look at the rahmah in the world, the rahmah that a mother has for her child, that's just one part of the rahmah that Allah subhanahu has sent down. Imagine if 99 parts of rahmah were to be given, what would happen? Then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, and that is why you see the creatures are merciful to one another, and why an animal may lift its hoof so that the young one may not come under it, out of this rahmah, this one piece, one part of rahmah. In this hadith it's very clear that animals have mercy for each other. It's very clear that they have feelings. We're not going to wait for science to prove it. It may be another 10 years, 20 years. We have the book of Allah subhanahu and the authentic hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The bee is such an important creation that when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam began to talk about it, he swore by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسُ مُحَمَّدٍ بِيَدِهِ, I swear by the one in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. إِنَّ مَثَلَ الْمُؤْمِنِ لَكَمَثَلِ النَّحْلَةِ أَكَلَتْ طَيِّبًا وَوَضَعَتْ طَيِّبًا وَوَقَعَتْ فَلَمْ تَكْسِرْ وَلَمْ تُفْسِدْ. In the Musnad of Ahmad, an authentic hadith, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, I swear by the one in whose hand is my soul, the example of the believer is certainly لَكَمَثَلِ, is certainly like the example of the bee. It eats good and it produces good, and when it falls or lands, it does not break a thing or damage it. When it steps foot, it does not damage or break. وَلَمْ تُفْسِدْ, nor does it corrupt anything. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam here is comparing the believer to a bee. And why is that? And that is from the great teaching methods of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We don't need to go and delve into teaching philosophies to come up with an education system. We have all the teaching strategies, philosophies, and methods defined in the book of Allah and the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Wellspring Elementary model is built from those strategies and those methods. All we have to do is derive them. They're there. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is using a teaching method called visualization. We hear the word mu'min, but what is a mu'min? What is the believer? What is the end product? For you to understand who we are to be, it makes sense that we look at the end product. What does the end product look like? If we can visualize it, then we have clear set goals we want to attain and reach. But if we can't visualize the end product, what does a mu'min look like? It will be difficult to be and live as a mu'min. So here the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is making us visualize it. And this is a principle in the Sharia. Al-hukm ala shay far'un an tasawwurih. That the ruling on something only comes about after properly conceptualizing it and visualizing it. One of the mistakes of giving a verdict or a fatwa or a decision or advice to someone is that when you haven't properly visualized their problem or the situation and you prematurely give them an answer. The hukum, the ruling, is dependent and contingent upon visualization. So here the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is drawing for us the qualities of a believer. He gave us the qualities of the bee to compare, and he mentioned some of them to get us started, to analyze, to think, to reflect, to try to derive some more. So the Prophet ﷺ said that the example of the believer is like this bee. And the Arabic word for the bee is an-nahla. If you add one dot to this word, it becomes an-nakhla. As a matter of fact, these two words are spelt the exact same way, because in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there were no dots, there were no vowel marks. The letters were written without dots and vowel marks. So if you were to write an-nahla, the bee, it will look exactly the same way if you were to write an-nakhla, which means the date palm tree. But if you were to add the dots, the difference is just one dot. The Prophet ﷺ compared the believer to a nahla. Add a dot to it, you get an-nakhla. The Prophet ﷺ then compared the Muslim to the nakhla. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna min ash-shajari shajaratun la yasqutu waraqaha wa innaha mithlu al-muslim." The Prophet ﷺ said that surely amongst the trees there's a tree whose leaves don't fall, and it's just like the Muslim. Tell me what it is. And the Sahaba, some of the companions, started guessing. Abdullah ibn Umar said, in my heart, I knew that it would be an-nakhla, the date palm tree, but I was shy to answer. And then they said, "Oh Messenger of Allah, tell us what this tree is." And then the Prophet ﷺ said, "An-nakhla, it's the date palm tree." Then Abdullah ibn Umar went home and told his father, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhuma, what happened. Then Umar radiyallahu anhu said, "It would have been more beloved to me that you would have answered and not been shy than such and such things." So here we see that this is not a riyah, that if you're questioned about something, it's not showing off, that if you're questioned and you answer. So here the Prophet ﷺ said, an-nakhla, which is the date palm tree. Why is it like a Muslim? Why is this tree whose leaves don't fall like a Muslim? It's like a Muslim because as the leaves of these trees don't fall, the iman of this Muslim doesn't fall and disappear. The iman of this Muslim is constant, it's there and it continues to rise. It's firm, it's established. Also, if you look at the nakhla, the date palm tree, every single part of the date palm tree is beneficial. The leaves are used. The bark of the tree is also used in construction, in houses. Every single part of the tree has a use, it's beneficial. As if the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the Muslim, every single part of him, his actions, his statements, his belief, his manners is always beneficial. Let's go back to the bee. The Prophet ﷺ talked about the bee that akalat tayyiba, it eats that which is tayyib, that which is good. The bee goes out and searches for the best of flowers to get the best of nectar. The believer is as such. It doesn't just take the first food that he finds. He makes sure that it's halal and tayyiba. Unlike the flies will fly around feces and the waste of other animals, but you will never see a bee fly around those impurities. The bee will only take what is pure, as such is the case of the believer. وَضَعَ الطَّيِّبَ. Not only is its intake pure, but what it produces is also pure. It produces honey. It gives out that which is good. Such is the believer. His statements are always good. He understands that إِنَّ اللَّهَ طَيِّب, that Allah is pure and good. And he does not accept that which is tayyib, except that which is pure and good. So the statements of the believer is always good. مَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. As the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let him say good or be silent. If he has nothing good to say, he will be silent. Because only good comes out of this believer. His actions will be good. An action that is tayyib is an action that is filled with ikhlas, and that which is done according to the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وَوَقَعَتْ. And when this bee lands on the petals of a flower, فَلَمْ تَكْسِرْ. It doesn't break it. وَلَمْ تُفْسِدْ. It doesn't corrupt it or damage it. Even though the bee has to insert its tongue into the flower to get out the nectar, it doesn't leave any damage. It leaves it intact. As such should be the case of the believer. This is the case of the bee. Unlike the locusts that go and damage crops, unlike the termites that damage wood, beehives that are in wooden areas, those hives and those bees don't damage the wood at all. You can remove the hive and there's no damage done. This is because the bee is tayyib. It eats good, produces good, and it does good. And one of its most important functions is that it pollinates other flowers. If you've ever seen a picture of a bee, you see this yellow basket on its leg. It carries a yellow basket. And in that basket, it gathers pollen and puts it in. While it gathers pollen to take back to the hive, also nectar with its tongue, some of the pollen gets brushed on its body. So as it goes from flower to flower, from tree to tree, from plants to plants, it ends up pollinating. The believer should be as such. What's the lesson here? That the bee not only takes from the environment, but it gives back. The bee is not just a consumer, it's also a conservationist. Not only does it consume the nectar, but it ensures that it pollinates other plants. It spreads the pollen so more flowers can come about. It saves the environment. It has concern for the environment. Not only does it produce honey for itself, but it produces enough honey for itself and for mankind. The bee is generous. It's not just concerned about itself. Okay, we have enough honey to live, that's it. It has been given a command by Allah subhanahu to make honey. So it makes honey not just for itself, but also for the rest of mankind. A believer, as such, should be concerned about other people. A lot of us are just concerned about ourselves. We're not concerned about our communities. We want to just take, give it to me for free. We never think of giving back. We never think of developing our communities. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a universal law. It's called the law of reciprocity. That whenever you give, you will get. Muslim or non-Muslim. Whenever you give, you will get. So the bee understands this law. It gives because it knows by giving it will get more nectar. But the difference for the believer, when he gives, is that when he gives, he gets ad'afan kathira. He gets in return many times more. And number two, when he gives, he doesn't just get in this dunya, he also gets in the akhirah. So as a community, or as an individual, or as a family, how much have we contributed to society? What impact have we done in our neighborhoods? What forms of generosity exist? This should be the brand of the Muslims. That when the Muslims are mentioned amongst the non-Muslims, oh, those are very generous people. They built the roads. They helped out the homeless. They feed the poor. This should be the case of the believer. Constantly giving. This should be part of our brand. The bees work as a community organized. There are bees that make honey. There are bees that stand guard at the hive. There's the queen bee, whom all the other bees follow her leadership. There's a strategy set. There's an organization. Every single bee is not taking his or her opinion and going in his or her own way. You go to a hive, you see organization. Every bee is busy fulfilling its role. Every bee knows its role in its community. It's defined. What is your role as a Muslim in our communities? What contribution are you giving to enhance the Muslim communities? There are even bees in the hive that are responsible for ventilation, because when the bees bring nectar and they mix it with their fluids, and it comes out becoming honey. There's a separate belly they have for honey, where they keep nectar and it mixes with their fluids, and then it comes out and it becomes honey. But the problem with that, it has a lot of moisture. So there are bees responsible for ventilating the hive by flapping their wings to keep it a constant temperature, which allows the water to evaporate such that it can retain and stay as honey. There are bees responsible for cleaning the hive. There are bees responsible who go from cell to cell to make sure that there is honey and it's filled. Diligent, dedicated, committed, organized. This is a community of bees. Do we have a community like that amongst the Muslims in the United States of America? Where every person says, give me a task, give me a role. This is my specialty. I can do this. Let me contribute. Everyone giving their share to strengthen the community. Which means that the bees are very serious about productivity. They're serious. They want to be productive. And they get up at dawn. This is the time they get up. They get up at dawn and start flying, looking for opportunities. The believer is just like this bee. The believer doesn't sleep. The believer is constantly on the lookout for opportunities. The believer gets up at dawn as well. If you study and look at successful businessmen, entrepreneurs, almost all of them get up at dawn, if not before. There's something about this time that it does something to your body when you get up. As Muslims, we are wired for success. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the system He has set for us, is enabling us to gain success easily. We stay away from drugs, from drinking. We're required to get up at dawn. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Certainly the believers have succeeded. Allah didn't say, قَدْ يُفْلِحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, that the believers will be successful. That's a mistranslation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say that. He said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. The believers have already succeeded. And that's said in the past tense, because it's emphasizing that if he is a mu'min, if he's like a bee, because the Prophet ﷺ compared the believer to the bee, then success is guaranteed. What time do you wake up? How productive are you? The bees don't accept bees that are lazy. They don't accept bees that are sleepy. What skills have you mastered? What trades are you an expert in? What knowledge do you specialize in? These are questions as believers we should ask ourselves. We cannot be a community that is devoid of skills, trade, and knowledge. This will make us be unproductive. The bees, my dear brothers and sisters, go out in search in the morning for nectar. They select the best of flowers. They take this nectar and they mix it with the fluids in their belly. Then they produce this sweet honey. The believer is the same. The believer at dawn takes Iman, mixes it with his heart, and produces the sweetness of Iman. Halawatul Iman. This nectar will only become honey if those fluids exist in that belly of that bee. The sweetness of Iman will only occur if Iman mixes in your heart, and then you will taste the sweetness of Iman. A bee that flies, and on its way stops by a tree that produces some sap. If it drinks from the sap, which it's not supposed to, its job is to go and take nectar. If it takes from the sap, the bee becomes drunk. Yes, there are alcoholics amongst the bees. This bee becomes drunk. It can't fly properly, it will crash. It can't walk properly, it can't see properly. And when it comes to the hive, guess what? There are guard bees at the hive. They see that this bee has gone and got itself drunk. They stop the bee from entering the hive. Allahu Akbar. They stop it. The bee is drunk, gets a little more aggressive. What's wrong? I'm free-spirited tonight. The guard bees then come and push the bee away. They push and shove the bee away from the hive, ensuring that this bee does not enter the hive. It does not accept a bee that is not productive. It does not accept in its community a bee that is lazy, a bee that is drunk, a bee that cannot produce results. It takes this bee away. Because number one, if it allows the bee to enter into the hive, this behavior might become cancerous. Other bees might want to go get wasted. Other bees will learn from this negative behavior. So it removes this bee from its community until the bee becomes sober. Also, it does not allow this bee to enter to break the organization, the order that is maintained. If you're running a business, you cannot have an unproductive employee. If you think they will change, most likely it won't happen. And don't be a victim of input bias. Input bias is when we judge productivity according to the amount of work done. Bees travel and visit over 5,000 flowers just to make 1 tablespoon of honey. In a lifetime of a bee, they travel many miles that equal many times around the earth. This bee that has traveled and visited 5,000 flowers and comes back with nectar, the guards don't accept this bee. They don't say, look at all the work he's done. That's input bias. We don't look at the work. We don't look at the long hours. We look at the outcome quality. The outcome quality here is that the nectar has been mixed with toxic chemicals. There is a quality control issue. This bee cannot be productive, so it's not allowed to enter. If this bee enters, then there's a problem with the purity of the honey. And how could the bees do that? The bees are obedient to Allah subhanahu. Allah Azza wa Jal called their product shifa, a cure. How can they mix alcohol in it? They have a responsibility to Allah Azza wa Jal to keep it pure, as we have a responsibility to keep our image of Islam pure, as we have a responsibility to keep our deen pure from shirk, forged hadith, bid'ah, innovations that have crept into our deen. Let us learn from the bees how careful they are with their product. If this bee comes back again drunk, not only will they shove the bee and not allow the bee to come in, a repeat offender then gets its legs broken. The had, the penalty, the bees all gather and they bite on his legs to break its legs. You'll never be able to crawl into our hive, because you've chosen to be a drunkard. In your businesses, in our organizations, in our communities, we are ever in so much need for quality. The bees eat well, they eat good, they produce what is good. How are our restaurants doing? The food that comes out on the table should be the best. The hygiene should be the best in the restaurant. The schools that we establish should be the best. The Islamic centers that we establish should be the best. It should scream quality. It should shine with quality. And we as a community should not compromise quality. And we should support it. Not just with our revenue, but with our skills as well. Demanding for everything to be free will compromise quality. If someone becomes Muslim tomorrow, how many masjids are you comfortable with to take him to visit? Say, this is a house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then if you're comfortable with the facility, this is the person's first image of a Muslim community. How many of them are you comfortable with? When he will come in and mix with the people, that hopefully he won't hear something negative. Hopefully someone won't yell at him because he didn't grow his beard yet. Hopefully someone won't scream at him because his pants are a little below his ankles. Hopefully they will understand he became Muslim yesterday. We should be comfortable to take them anywhere. And that only happens if we're concerned about quality as the bees are. They're efficient in building their hives. The shape that they've chosen is hexagons. And that is proven to be efficient for space and structure. The cells are made up in this way. And not only are they hexagons, but they're tilted. They're tilted so the honey won't fall out. And when the honey is put in, there's a certain bee, yarhamakullah, a certain bee that's responsible to put wax over it, to seal it. This is like the believer. When he builds something, he builds it well. When he produces something, he produces it well. A building constructed by a Muslim company should be the best constructed. Concerned with the product, they seal it with wax. to make sure it doesn't get wasted. And that's why when you look at the honeycomb, you'll see the whiteness, that is the wax that comes out of the abdomens of these bees. They land on flowers, they don't break it, they don't damage it. Our lesson from that is how do we use public facilities? A lot of us, if things are not ours, we don't care. How do we use the bathrooms of the masjids? It's not ours, we don't care. We don't have to clean after we're done. How do we open and close the doors of facilities that are not ours? How do we use devices and equipment that are not ours? How do we care about our environment? If you want to see how bad it is, go to Hajj. Go to Hajj. The concept for many people of after you finish eating something, taking that box and throwing in the garbage is not there. The concept is you finish eating, drop it on the floor. I don't care. It's not my house. It's not my neighborhood. It's not my porch. Who's going to pick it up? Who cares? The bees are concerned about the environment. They don't damage it. They don't corrupt it. They maintain it. The character of the believer should be as such. You go to someone's house, you go to a masjid, use another facility, we use it with care. There's a banish in the masjid, you don't play horse riding on it. Sit on it, may break, oh, it broke, sorry, walk out. There has to be this care beyond just our property. This care just beyond, also beyond our environment. And that's when the believer shines. And this is what the bees do when they fly around environments that are not theirs. The bee can sting, but it doesn't go around stinging people. The believer may have authority or power, and he doesn't crush others with it. He doesn't use it as a means to debase others. The bee can sting those that bother it, but it doesn't sting every single one that bothers it. Because it's focused. It has a job to do. It has to bring back nectar, lots of it. It has to not just feed itself, it has to feed its hive, feed the queen, feed the world. Look at how global the bees are. How concerned are we about our global situation? But they stay focused, as such as the believer. The believer doesn't look left or right to critics all the time. Because critics, there will always be critics. Some valid criticism, some invalid. The believer has a mission, as the bee has a mission set by Allah subhanahu, and they continue pursuing it until they reach their goals. The bees, most of the production of the honey happen in the hive. You don't even see it. It's not visible. You don't see how the bees maintain themselves. It's not out in the open. As such as the believer, that when he works for Allah subhanahu, he's not concerned about showing off to people. He's concerned about showing it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala jalla wa ala. He's not concerned about patting on the back. He's not concerned about the credit. As the bee does most of it without being seen, the believer doesn't do good deeds to be seen. The bees are also smart. They know that they have to die. So they work efficiently. They work hard. Because they're focused and they know death is their end. Such as the believer. He works constantly, he works. Because he knows death is coming soon. How productive are you? How much have you done in your life so far? Are you pleased with that? They say the amounts that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah accomplished in his lifetime in da'wah and writings and so on and so forth. An average person would have to live 4 times to do what he did. How is that possible? How are the bees able to travel many, many thousands of miles and go about 6 or 7 to 10 times around the earth in their total mileage? The answer is time management. They're efficient with their time. They don't waste their time. There's no loose hanging out time. Every time is that they're spending, they're making sure they're being productive. So when a bee flies to a flower and takes nectar, before it does it, it looks at the electrical fields around the flower. If it has been disrupted, it knows that a bee already came here. There's no need to go and see if there's nectar there. And if a bee goes and takes nectar from a flower, it leaves a scent mark for the other bees. It tags it. But don't waste your time here. I already took the nectar out of this one. Go to the next one. How is your time management in your life? How is our time management as a community? How do we use our resources? How efficient are we? My dear brothers and sisters, these are just some of the lessons we can learn from this amazing creation, the bee. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst those who benefit from the lessons of the bee, and make us amongst those who are true believers as described by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.